Hey everyone, my name is Dr. Dolores Tarver. I'm a licensed psychologist here in Georgia, and it is time for the TT Time with Dr. Tarver is a wellness-based podcast. It is not intended to be a substitute for a relationship with a licensed mental health provider. We're plugging right along, everybody. Here we are in July. We're halfway through the month already. Kids will be starting school soon here in my area. Some of you that are on different coasts, they might not start until after Labor Day, but here in the South, we like to start them at the end of July and the beginning of August. So they are dreading going back to school, and their parents could not be more excited. We are in Minority Mental Health Awareness Month, and we have been trying to just discuss a lot of the challenges that people of color face within communities, marginalized groups face in communities, and also just being able to access culturally responsive mental health care. So, the first week, we got into some of the challenges that can happen, particularly when people feel rejected, and how to be able to overcome that rejection. Last week, we talked about being beyond the bars and the effects of parental incarceration on families. And as you all know, and I have so many things that I want to talk about, this week I was really trying to figure out like what are you going to address? And I think what I ultimately landed on, because I've been hearing so many conversations about this, is being able to overcome what are hurtful legacies in our lives. And it actually, one of my favorite books, Toxic Parents, um, Overcoming Their Hurtful Legacy and Reclaiming Your Life, is a book that it's by Dr. Susan Ford. It's a book that I frequently reference all the time. And I've been talking probably for the past maybe month or so to a lot of people who are struggling with whether or not they're a good parent, and what they're basing whether or not they're a good parent on is, what do you think, how their children behave, how their children turned out, right? Because often we as parents feel like our children are our legacies. And then on the flip side of that, I have been talking to clients who feel like their parents were such a negative force in their lives that they don't feel like they are able to have any kind of legacy because they have the cloud of the doubt and the criticism over them, and so it just stops them from being able to move forward because the limitations of their parents are something that feels like it's just tethering them backwards, and they just cannot get ahead. They cannot see themselves being in the spaces where they desire to be. So that's what I'm going to address today, right? So we're going to be talking about overcoming these hurtful legacies, whether it is you as a parent who feels like you have harmed your children and are concerned about the ways that they turned out, or you as a child, who is an adult now, is trying to navigate a world where the people who were supposed to be your security and your safety couldn't show up for you. I'm going to try to stay on track here. So you all work with me. Pray for you, girl. Okay, so let's start with essentially parental guilt. So, for those of you who are parents, you know that being a parent is not something that, even though there's a lot of books out there on parenting, is not necessarily something where there is just a clear, easy guide. All of us do parenting a little different. We take from what our parents taught us. Maybe your grandparents, you might have had a large support system of people who were there to be able to pour into you as you were growing up. And then some of us, we didn't have large groups of people. So there might have been a person. It might have been a grandma. It might have been a grandfather. It might have been a dad. It might have been a mom. It might have been an auntie or an uncle. Or it may be that there was a mentor who guided us, particularly if we were in situations where, for whatever reason, our parents weren't able to show up for us. And so we take the information, whatever it was we learned from whoever it was that nurtured us in our early years, We combine that with some of the information the doctors tell us, right? Because they give us guidance as well. Some of you may be working with pediatricians raising your helping as you raise your children. Some of you may have psychological providers because our kids are dealing with a lot of different things, have a lot of needs. So you might have some behavioral people that are working with you. So you're taking that information, that education, and then of course the schools, right? And so the schools are giving you some guidance as well. Like, oh, hey, we're noticing that your child is struggling in this area, or they seem to be really gifted and talented in this area, and we want to nurture it. So there are just so many things that play into us being able to be parents. And we all do the best we know how to do. And I think a lot of times our guilt comes from the results of that best. So there may have been times when you raised your voice and you didn't really feel good about doing that. There may have been times when you felt like that punishment didn't really fit the crime. I was a little bit more harsh than I wanted to be. It may be that you weren't maybe as structured and as guided and as disciplined as perhaps was warranted. And now you're at a position and a place in your life where you're like, my kids are just super ungrateful and they just expect me to take care of everything and fix all of the things that they end up getting into these situations. And they expect me to be this ongoing ATM and this place for them to come back to because they're not making good decisions out there, right? So all of these things can make us kind of question, like, what did I do wrong? What is it that I did to have a child that is ungrateful, is unappreciative, is unmotivated? I think a lot of us struggle with, we all have images of who we want our children to be. And so when they don't fit that image, it can be very disappointing for us. And it's not necessarily that those images are like, hey, I want you to be like me, but oftentimes it's, I want you to be better than me. So I wanted you to go get an education because maybe I didn't have an opportunity to do that. I wanted to be able to pay for you to go to school because I didn't have anybody pay for me. I wanted to guide you in your military career because I didn't have anybody to talk to me about the military. I wanted to help you build this business for yourself because I didn't have people who showed me how to do that when I was coming up. And so we pour all of these things into them. And so we're expecting what? A return on our investment, because ultimately we want to be proud of our children. That is one of the things as parents, I think that gives us meaning and purpose. It's like, I'm raising this little human and they're going to grow up and they're going to be this big, great human, right? But that's not the reality for all of us. Like, sometimes our children are going to struggle. Like, some of them are going to have cognitive challenges that they deal with. And so there may be just certain things that they're not able to do in the ways that other people are able to do. And so already we feel like, okay, now I'm being punished because my child has some special needs or some different abilities than other children do. They're struggling with ADHD. They've got these behavioral problems. They have these emotional outbursts. They're running away. And I'm thinking to myself, like, wow, am I so awful that I'm ending up dealing with all these challenges in a kid, right? Because it's kind of innate in us, I think, on some level, to blame ourselves for how our children turn out. And so we're struggling because it's like, what did I create? You end up with an addiction to substances. And I think, what did I do to you? You end up dealing with depression and anxiety. And I think, oh my gosh, how did I make your life so terrible that you're dealing with all of these things? You're having problems in relationships. You're having multiple children. You're not taking care of them. Right? So we're dealing with all of these things that we feel like are a reflection on us as a poor parent. And I do think it's important for us to understand a few things about that, right? So one is that there is a such thing as a genetic predisposition toward things. And no, it's not fair that in our lives we are going to be passed down things from other people who were in our family, stuff we didn't have anything to do with, but that is part of our genetic makeup. And that does include mental illness. So it's very important for us to understand as parents that you're not being punished when your child experiences mental illness. This could be something that comes from the family. And because oftentimes in families of color, we don't talk about mental health. Don't get me started on that one. But it is important for us to understand these things. So when you experience somebody in your family who has a cognitive deficit, who has ADHD, who is on the spectrum for autism, who deals with schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, and we're seeing kids exhibit symptoms earlier and earlier in their lives, that you don't immediately think, oh, there's something wrong with me, I did this. And particularly if we ourselves struggle with mental illness, like, oh, I gave this to you, right? But just like your hair color and your eye color, we know that we have recessive genes. We know we have dominant genes. And so we do know that first degree biological relatives are much more likely to experience similar types of things, particularly when it comes to your medical health and your mental health, right? And so instead of us blaming ourselves, I think it's important for us to understand, right? So that's number one, is to be able to understand the dynamics that are at play so that you can maneuver and manage them better with good education and with good resources, because it can be particularly difficult, especially when you have younger children who have a lot of needs, because in some areas there aren't a lot of resources. Like here in our area, we don't have a lot of facilities that people can go to when they need for their medication to be adjusted, when they need to be able to get day treatment, when they need to be able to learn ongoing skills and be within a facility learning those behavioral skills, those adaptive skills, being able to help learn emotionally regulate. You'll hear dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT. That's one of the skills that we learn to teach people how to ground, to be able to be present with themselves, to be able to calm their bodies down, to be able to navigate through decisions and not be impulsive, right? And a lot of places don't have those specific resources. And so, particularly when you're dealing with youth and adolescents, adults, you might have a little bit more flexibility to be able to go to another city to go to a treatment program. But even then, right, the barriers, we're talking about barriers to being able to get culturally responsive care. Insurance can be a barrier, but also being able to identify places that are healthy places to go, because not all mental health facilities are created equal. So some of them may not necessarily be the best fit for your loved one. And so being able to navigate those things. But so as we're aware of what potentially could happen in our families, we're able to go ahead and gather resources before we need them. And you all know I'm a prevention type of person. So I always say, have your resources before you need them. So when you need them, you can immediately be able to access them and get people with the services they need instead of having to spend that extra time trying to find them. And it can be really frustrating. I frequently have people call me from all over the place that just happened to do a Google search and saw my name, and they're so desperate to just find some help. What am I going to do? I'm going to do my very best to help you and get you some resources, even if you're in another state than I'm in or another city than I'm in, because it's important for us to be able to have people who advocate for us, but we need to know who those people are, right? So that's two, being able to know who your resources are and who's available. I tell you all frequently, there's a lot of different resources now. Where you can find that information. And so therapy for Black girls I reference quite a good bit, because there's a lot of providers listed on there, but sometimes you're going to find that there's not a provider in a specific state. So you might have to go to the American Psychological Association to be able to find some Psychology Today, to be able to find some resources. But I am noticing that some of our licensed professional social workers, our licensed clinical social workers, and our licensed professional counselors are also putting listservs together. So I'll drop a few of those options for you all as well. Then three, as a parent, I think it's very important for us to be able to separate out what's our stuff and what are our young people's things. Right, because they do have the capacity to make their own decisions as they get to be adults. And I'm talking about when their brains fully develop. And I know parents, y'all like their brains still developing at 20s. Yes, they are. So around that mid 25 point is when their brains fully develop. And so they are going to be immature, some of them, and some of them are not going to make the best decisions, and they're going to be a bit impulsive. And so, and you're blaming yourself, like, I know you weren't raised like this. I know I taught you better than that. Why are you living like that? Who are these people that you're around? What are these habits that you're engaging in? When did you pick that up? Right? But being able to recognize that part of a young adult's growth process is for them to be able to connect with an identity. And oftentimes we are looking for other people to affirm us as a part of that identity. If you are not a person who knows yourself, who knows who you are and whose you are, then you don't have an anchor. And whenever you don't have an anchor, that's when there's much more of that likelihood for you to get involved with people who meet temporary need, or at least it feels like they do. So a lot of times I'm telling parents, yeah, they're going to chase that relationship at this point in their lives because they're looking for that affirmation. It's like, well, I love them. They got unconditional love. I don't understand why they're out there seeking it from this person who isn't on their level, right? But that's part of that journey of them finding themselves, because until they see their worth, they're not going to be able to recognize when other people don't. Right. So I know that you love them. I know that you gave them everything that you possibly could give them. But again, you have to recognize where you end and they begin. Oftentimes, people still chase those things, even if they were provided to them, because there's something in them that isn't quite whole. And what we recognize is there are a lot of things that influence that for young people growing up. It may be the social relationships they had growing up. It may be their first romantic love relationships. It may be self esteem kinds of things that are affecting them. And so being able to still affirm them, hey, I'm going to affirm you, I'm going to love you, and that love is unconditional, but I also have to have some of those good boundaries, right? Which that's four. Number four is it's important for you to have good boundaries with your young person. A lot of times when we have that parent guilt, like, oh, I did this, I created this. Maybe you had a co-parent die, and so it's like, oh, I'm their only parent, I'm all they have, and so you feel like this additional responsibility to make sure that you're there for them. But sometimes what we do is we enable our children, and we set up this dynamic where they're unable to take care of themselves, they're unable to function because we're over functioning, so they're under functioning. Right? And so you're not actually helping your child when you take on so much of that role in their lives that they don't have the ability to gain the skills themselves. That's that whole teach a man to fish parable, right? So we want to make sure that our children have the resources that they need in order for them to make good decisions. And let me be clear with you, once they've been taught, it's on them to execute those skills. But you have given them the resources to have those skills. And so that's where you end, and that's where the boundaries begin. Hey, I am not going to continue to bail you out of jail when you have been arrested 6 times in 3 months, right? Because now what I'm doing is I'm saying to you that it is okay for you to take advantage of these resources and to be able to use me. And we want to make sure that we're not encouraging our young people to do that. All right, so let's switch over and talk about for those of you who have parents who left you a painful legacy. A lot of trauma, abuse involved in that, not feeling loved, not having that secure attachment, and you feel as if you don't see yourself as whole and worthy because they never affirmed you as being such. So I want to talk to you a little bit about some strategies to address that. Right? One is it's important for you to identify who you are. It is important that you have a clear plan of who you are. And I frequently will tell people, why are you listening to the advice of people who you know were unhealthy, who you know were dealing with their own trauma, who you know engaged in dysfunctional patterns and behaviors, and you're using their voice as your voice now. So you have got to look at things differently. You have got to, even if you didn't experience healthy, you have got to look and find what healthy looks like. And there's a lot of places for that. Come on, plug for therapy. You can do that in therapy. There's some wonderful self-help books. I just described to you Toxic Parents is a really good book that I love by Dr. Susan Forward. And so being able to do some reading and recognize like, hey, I don't have to stay in this place simply because it's where I started, right? Because a lot of times we think where we started is where we're going to end. No, ma'am, no, sir. Where you start is just a beginning. There are going to be a lot of other beginnings in your life, and we start from where we stopped. So we'll keep on going until we progress to get to the place that we have been called to be. But only if you will not be a hindrance to your own growth and development, which is why it's important for you to have yourself a parenting goal. So if you're trying not to be, how many of you have said, I want to be like my parents when I grow up, right? But if I'm going to be like them because I'm going to do what I saw. So if I don't want to do that, then I have to be clear about what my parenting goals are. What's important to me? And this is sometimes where we end up overextending ourselves to our kids because I overgive to my children, but we want to be able to have some balance in that parenting plan and ensure that we're giving our kids, we always got to think about that you want to implant in your kids skills, that you're building them to be able to take care of themselves and being able to walk in whatever their purpose is, right? So those are the things you're nurturing. Not that they have to have everything, not that they have to go everywhere. That's not a part of it. You do want to expose them to things, but they also need to learn that they won't get everything that they want when they want it. And sometimes they won't get it at all because it's not anything that they need. And that's that boundary piece, right? And so that's very important as a part of that parenting plan for you too. Is like, hey, I don't want to just be so fluid in my boundaries that I allow you to do everything, and you are not in a position to be mature enough to make good decisions. I need to monitor you. So I want to be very clear about what that's going to look like and talk to your children about it, and they understand what their consequences are. And yes, parents, you do have to be consistent in reinforcing those consequences. When we take a look at our thinking patterns, we really want to be mindful of where we're stuck. What is it that I keep kind of playing over and over again in my head that's allowing me to feel unworthy, that's allowing me to feel tethered, that I can't see myself as who I could be because I'm so busy still consumed in who my parents said I was. Not again recognizing that their own pain interfered with how they were able to show up for you. And so being able to practice positive thinking, to be able to challenge some of those distortions, to be able to recognize those stuck points and be able to reconstruct them is one of the best ways for you to be able to think differently, because so as we think shall we be. We also want to make sure that we're in a position to function autonomously, right? So, us being able to be independent. A lot of times we don't feel like we're able to move forward and we're tethered because we're still depending on other people to meet needs that they've never been able to meet. We keep going to them. Your parents may still be alive. You keep going to them, wanting them to affirm your next venture, wanting them to celebrate your accomplishments, and they're not, because that's not the place that they're in. But we're still dependent on, we're still those little kids looking for that affirmation for them. So we're holding on to dear life to any possible affirmation that they could give me, just if they give me just a little something, right? And so being able to be independent allows you to recognize that you don't need that for them in order for that to be true for you. And there are also other places where you can get it. Come here, positive, healthy support system. And it is important for us to recognize some people are so tied to the blood bonds that they overlook the opportunity for them to have bonds with other people who love, care for, and value them because they're not your blood family. There is chosen family as well. And so it's very important that you are flexible in how you see your support system, and that you don't have such a narrow perspective on what that looks like, that it's interfering with your ability to be valued, affirmed, and supported in a variety of ways. That might be your church family. You might be a part of a community organization that can affirm you. You may have people that you work with that can affirm you. So being able to see those different angles is very important in terms of your growth. And I will also tell you that it's important for you to have a clear identity about who you are, right? Because once you are anchored in who you are, then it doesn't matter which way the storm blows, you're going to remain steadfast. But you have to be able to believe that that is true about you. And sometimes we have a really hard time being able to see the positive characteristics in us, particularly when we grew up in environments where people didn't affirm us. So it may be helpful for you to ask other people to be able to let you know, like, hey, here are the ways that you are amazing, because you may not be able to see it when you had those negative thoughts that you have been implanted by those family members. And so being able to break free from that and like, no, who I am is a person that's loving and kind, who's purposed, who's driven, and here's how I'm driven, and this is what she looks like, this is what he looks like, this is what they look like in terms of their goals and what they want to accomplish in their timeline. We've talked a lot about that you want to have specific and measurable goals in order for you to be able to make progress. So what I will say to you is that you are not hindered by who your parents were, nor are you hindered by who your children become, but you are responsible for being your best self, okay? You all be well.